Hello, good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. I'm Martha Kordiak-Mert. I'm Chief Growth Officer at SavingForCollege.com, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our year-end college savings webcast. Thanks for joining us. Before we start, I'd like to take a minute to thank our sponsor, Private College 529. With Private College 529, you buy tomorrow's tuition at today's prices. No matter how much tuition increases, your prepaid tuition is guaranteed by all participating colleges. You take no risk in the volatile financial markets and pay no fees. Every dollar buys tuition at any of the nearly 300 participating schools. Give your children the education they deserve at a price you can afford. With Private College 529 plan, you can potentially save thousands of dollars, putting the ideal education within reach. Now I'd like to introduce our moderator for today's event. Zack Friedman is founder and CEO of Make Lemonade, a technology-driven personal finance marketplace that helps consumers make smarter financial decisions so that they can live a better financial life. Zack is a nationally recognized author who contributes to Forbes and appears regularly in leading publications, television, and radio. You may have come across him on CNN or heard his voice on NPR. We're thrilled to have him and our three expert panelists helping out today. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Zack.
Thanks so much, and it's such a pleasure to be here. Very excited about today. We have a huge audience out there all across the country, and we're very excited to get going. We've assembled a phenomenal group of panelists today, some of the best out there. Especially want to thank SavingForCollege.com for hosting this wonderful event. I'd like to thank Private College 529 for sponsoring, and everyone who's been a part of this behind the scenes and in front. We're very grateful for everyone to be here today. We're going to get to your questions in a moment, but first I'd love to introduce our phenomenal panelists. Let's start with Katie Flynn. She is the Chief Editor at SavingForCollege.com, which, as you know, is the leading independent source of information about 529 plans. She's written numerous articles on the topic and has been quoted in financial publications, including the Wall Street Journal, Fortune, and Money. Nancy Farmer, President and CEO of Tuition Plan Consortium, which is the sponsor of the Private College 529 plan. She's been responsible for the administration and operations and promotes the plan with nearly 300 participating institutions, and she also recruits additional institutions to participate in their plans. And also we have Audrey Smith, who is Vice President for Enrollment at Smith College. She oversees the admission, registrar, and student financial services offices and provides institutional leadership. She's an expert on all aspects of student loans and higher education and many other topics. So we've assembled a great team for you today. We're going to delve into your questions. We've received many of them already in advance of this webinar, and there'll be more that will be coming out today live, so please continue to send us your questions. But before we delve into your questions, we'd love to start with a poll question. We'll be doing 3 polls throughout this webinar, one at the outset. And the first one we're going to choose right now, and I'll make it go live. And that question is, what of these do you use or plan to use for saving for college? There's 5 different choices. There's 529 plans, there's Coverdell ESA, Roth IRA, regular savings account, or other. So you can respond to that now, and it is live. As we're waiting for those results, let's delve into our first question. And it's been a topic that's been pretty popular over these past couple of weeks as we've seen the tax bill come out. And I'd love to ask our panel just to jump right in, because a lot of you have asked this from across the country. What is the latest and greatest with the tax bill? We have the Senate version, the House version. What is the impact of 529 plans, and what should folks be thinking about as they save and pay for college? Let's open it up to the panel, and anyone can jump in and help answer that question.
Sure, I can handle this one. Most recently, Senator Ted Cruz filed an amendment which would make 529 plans more flexible, being that right now 529 plans are only to be used for higher education expenses, but with his new proposal, it would open 529 plans up to be used for K through 12 private school expenses as well as homeschool. So that's a big difference for us. I mean, right now we promote 529 plans saving for college, but this would make 529 plans more just saving for education in general.
That's great. And before we open that up to the other panelists, let me just update you on the poll that we have. Many of you have already responded, some are still responding, but with 81% of you have voted in total, and the results are as follows. 88% of you, a resounding 88%, are using 529 plans to pay for college, followed by about 30% for regular savings accounts, followed by 20% with a Roth IRA, 18% other, 8% Coverdell ESA. So we'll leave that poll there and go back to the team. Any other perspectives on the latest tax bill and its impact on 529 plans?
Well, I think, Zach, for those 8% who do have savings in a Coverdell, they'll want to watch what happens as this bill works its way through conference. The House version of the bill actually eliminates, well, restricts contributions going forward after 2018, but it will allow those Coverdell assets to be rolled into a 529 account. So if you're one of those Coverdell owners, you probably want to watch what happens to this bill in conference and what flexibility you have with the Coverdells going forward. My understanding is that the Senate bill doesn't do anything with the Coverdell, so you could continue to have both, even though you'd have more flexibility with the 529 plan.
And the only other point I'd like to add is that saving for college is critical regardless of the tax implications. So it's important to look at the tax implications so that you can maximize your returns. But we should all be thinking, those of us who have the interest in the future for children and grandchildren, about the importance of saving, even if it's modest amounts.
And let's talk about just the general saving aspect of for college. It's one of the largest expenses really that we have as parents or grandparents. And just starting with the very basics, Vicki has a question from Virginia. How much should someone save for college? And I'll add to that, when should they start saving? At what time period? Is it when your child is born? Is it before your child is born? Is it 5 years, 10 years before school? Help everyone understand what are the optimal times to save and how much to save.
I'll start and then invite other panelists to come in, but I would say that certainly at the time that a child is on the way or is born, there's a lot of new expenses, but I think it's really important, as with all kinds of savings, retirement is obviously even more important than college savings, but like retirement, start small and keep adding to it and add to the growth. So I think as a child is born is the right time to begin. And how much is going to depend upon the family circumstances and what is possible.
Okay. Katie, Nancy?
Yeah, I'll add to that. Like Audrey said, the sooner the better. And, you know, maybe you don't have a big lump sum to put in. Maybe you can't commit to, you know, $200 a month, but do what you can. And then throughout the child's life, you know, birthdays, holidays are coming up, graduations, ask friends and family to help. That's the great thing about 529 plans, is that other people can contribute to help. And of course, you know, as Audrey mentioned, the longer you save, the longer you can take advantage of the tax-free compounding.
Yeah, I agree with the panelists, and you know, try and think about points where you might have an opportunity to contribute to college savings. Maybe when you get a pay increase, a portion of that can be set aside to go into college savings, or maybe when your child isn't going to daycare anymore, that they're going to kindergarten, a portion of that money you were spending on daycare. So to Audrey's point, even if it's modest amounts, but look for opportunities where you might be able to increase that over time, because you know, the more you save, the less you're going to borrow.
A question from Alicia in Connecticut, who asks a very important one. How does someone choose a 529 plan? Where are the go-to aspects in terms of sites or resources? And how can they make a decision about choosing that 529 plan? There are so many options out there, a lot of complex financial information to digest. What do you all recommend that Alicia in Connecticut could do?
Can I start with that one? Because I want to say it so that Katie doesn't have to. The best place to start is savingforcollege.com. I mean, it really is. And that's not just coming from me. I think there are lots of other experts out there who direct families to go to that site. I mean, there's a very thorough evaluation of every plan. It's easy to read and interpret. The fees are easy to understand. I think it's a great service for families trying to sort that out, knowing there are 100 different plans to choose from. That's a very daunting task. So I think savingforcollege.com does a great job.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll of course second that. there's a lot to consider when you're choosing a 529 plan. There's, 529 savings plans, which is the more popular option, but then there's also the prepaid plans, such as the plan that, Nancy works with. And so, you've got to think of these are investment products. So you want to look at the investment performance. You want to look at the fees they're charging you. You want to look at the history of the investment manager, make sure they're reputable, make sure you're comfortable with the type of risks associated with investing. So there's just a lot to consider, and it's a big investment, so you want to make sure that you do understand, and savingforcollege.com is a great resource, especially for someone just getting started.
And as a follow-up to that, Tony in Illinois is asking, is it better to use an in-state 529 plan or an out-of-state plan? How does someone make that determination whether to go in-state or out-of-state?
Well, I would say, and you'll probably hear this a lot today, it depends. And I think to Katie's point, so if you're thinking about, if you're a graduate of the University of Chicago and your father's a graduate of the University of Chicago and you really want your kids to go to the University of Chicago, you might very well want to look at Private College 529, where you can prepay tuition that can be used at University of Chicago. It's not limited to that. There are 300 schools across the country, but if your family tradition is the University of Michigan, well, you certainly wouldn't want Private College 529. I think you always want to start with your home state plan. You want to see what the state tax deduction is available to you, and then from there evaluate whether that's worth it to you. And again, to the points Katie just made, look at the manager, look at the fees, look at the investment options, what best fits your needs and your goals.
Okay, that's good. Why don't we move to Andy in Ohio, who is asking a question about families with multiple children. So as Andy and others across the country think about planning for multiple children, what do you recommend, and we can go with Katie, for each child having their own 529 plan, or if there's a way that they should think about one account for multiple children, how should they make that decision?
Sure. So with a 529 plan, you're only allowed one beneficiary. However, you can change that beneficiary without incurring any tax consequences. So if you're going to keep the same account for more than one child, you want to make sure they're not going to be withdrawing in the same year. You wouldn't be able to do that. So, I mean, if you have children that are, a big gap in between their age, you can certainly use the 529 plan for the first child and then switch it over to the second one when they're ready. However, 529 plans do offer age-based investment options, which this is what's really good for like a beginning investor or someone who wants to be hands-off, because the investment allocations will change automatically over time as the beneficiary gets closer to college. So in this case, it's better to have a plan for each child, because then you can set it up to kind of work with their age and make sure that their investments are being allocated at the right time for that particular child, especially if they're, two different ages. I mean, if they're twins, you're going to have two different plans because you can only have one beneficiary.
Okay. And as a follow-up, Julia in Colorado asked, her son will be starting college next fall, so 2018, and she's asking, is it beneficial to open a 529 plan using funds from a regular savings account? So this is someone who has a child going to college within a year, and does it make sense for her to open a 529 plan at this point? Nancy, do you want to take that one?
Sure. I'm so sorry to say this again, but it sort of depends on how much she has in that savings account. If she has a substantial amount of money that she's going to spread over 4 years, well, she's going to have the benefit of an investment return. To Katie's point, with a child in college, your investments are going to be far more conservative, but you're still going to benefit from some return over the period that the student is enrolled. So I think it would depend in part on how much is in that savings account available to put into the 529 account. I'm going to say there are many instances where there isn't some benefit of getting it out of that general savings account and into a 529 account.
It's also worth,
Sure, go ahead.
I was just going to add that if you live in a state that offers a state tax benefit, that could be another incentive to put the money into a 529 plan, because of course you'll get to deduct a portion of that contribution from your state income tax.
That's right. And how do you think that will be impacted for the states that do not allow, particularly if the Senate and House bill gets consolidated and some of the states such as New York or California that have high income taxes on the state level. Is there any impact there to the deductibility, as you just mentioned, for state income taxes with regard to 529 plans?
There haven't been any mentions that I've read so far regarding the 529 state tax benefits in the new bill. I mean, I guess that would be, the states would have to decide if they want to make those changes.
Okay. Audrey, a question for you. We have a question that's come in and asking if someone has saved in their 529 plan throughout their child's life as they are about to embark onto higher education, but for some reason decide not to go to college, but they have all this money sitting in a 529 plan. Any perspectives on what that individual can do if their child decides not to go to college, for example?
Well, certainly, as Katie mentioned earlier, there's the option of changing the beneficiary on that account. So if they've got another child or a niece or nephew or a grandchild, coming down the pike, you have the option of letting those savings grow. I think it becomes, you're going to have if it's not used for college expenses, then you're losing those tax advantages that you've had. So hopefully you're in a position where you can change the beneficiary on that account.
And certainly in the circumstance where the parent only has one child, that is the only child, what can be done with those funds, if anything? Nancy, if the child does not go to college and there are no other children or other beneficiaries to name, can you name someone outside of your family, for example, to change the beneficiary there? Or if you don't have that option, is there anything you can do with that pot of money that is sitting within inside the plan?
I think that's one of the wonderful things about 529 plans is the account owner controls those assets until they're used or refunded. So in that circumstance where you just don't have anybody else who can use those assets for qualified higher education expenses, you can take a refund. You can use that money to go on a cruise or buy a car. You're going to pay ordinary taxes on the increase in value, and you'll pay a 10% penalty. But the account owner controls those assets.
Yeah, and a qualified you can change the beneficiary to any qualifying family member, which also includes nieces, nephews. I mean, so it's pretty broad. It's not just a sibling. So you have a few options.
Right. And we have such a rich diversity of higher education in the United States that you may have started out planning for your child to go to the University of Chicago or Smith, and then they may go to the local university, or so there's a range of higher education. So even if the student is not going right away to a traditional 4-year residential college, there may be other options down the road. So you might want to
that's a really good point, Audrey. It also includes community college, trade schools, if the student wants to be a beautician, culinary school. There's a lot of different options. And there's actually a tool on savingforcollege.com. Is your institution 529 eligible, where you can look up your school and make sure that your withdrawals would be qualified to pay for that school. It even includes some international schools, so it's not just limited to your regular state 4-year colleges or private colleges.
Mm-hmm. Very good. We have questions rolling in. I would encourage everyone to keep sending us your questions. We'll be going the full hour, another 40 minutes or so. So please send us your questions, and we'll get to another poll question in about 12 minutes from now. But before we go there, I would love to delve in with Audrey about the cost of higher education. We certainly talked about 529 plans, and we'll continue with that. But the cost of higher education is at an all-time high, particularly for students and families, and paying for that education at the outset in terms of borrowing student loans and then repaying them after graduation. And we've seen universities and colleges across the country that have raised tuition rates each year, certainly to meet either the cost of inflation or their other expenses at the university. How should parents really, and grandparents and others who pay for college, students themselves, really think about the rising cost of education and in that decision making, whether they're starting to save now or they're coming to college and they don't have the funds? How should they be thinking about borrowing student loans, finding scholarships, grants? How can they make sense of that entire puzzle and meet these high education costs that exist across the country?
So it's a very important question for families to think about. And I'll begin by saying, yes, across higher education, the costs have been rising faster than inflation for many years, largely because this is it's pretty low, it's largely based on labor cost and highly educated labor, and so it's harder to achieve efficiencies in a college education where you've got faculty members and demonstrated results from lower student-faculty ratios than in a manufacturing process. So yes, the costs are rising, but the return on that investment is rising as well. So as we think about the outcomes for college graduates in terms of not only income, but other aspects of lifestyle, including civic engagement, health, all of those things, the outcomes are very, very positive. So it's an investment that's well worth making, and by planning early and setting aside some funds, we're preserving choice for that child or family member that you care about, opening up a broader array of options for that student. So if you want to see those outcomes, I really would recommend looking at some of the College Board documentation, including Education Pays. You can just go to collegeboard.org and then type in Education Pays, and you can see the many outcomes that include income, but include other outcomes as well.
That's great. And I think it's also important for folks to realize when they're thinking about how to pay for college and balancing federal loans and private loans and scholarships and grants, the way I think about it, and I'd love to hear perspectives if you all see it differently, but is to start to maximize your federal student loans that you can take first. But even before going there is to really maximize scholarships and grant money that you can receive either from the educational institution, first and foremost, or from your local community or your state government or other federal scholarships or grants that exist. Then it's best in order of operations to take federal student loans. These are things like Stafford loans or PLUS loans that are through the federal government. They have benefits that provide a number of benefits, such as federal student loan repayment programs that give you flexibility on the repayment side after you graduate. They also have forbearance, deferral, other protections in case you get into financial hardship or can't make the loan payments. And then lastly, private student loans, which are offered by various private student loan companies, banks, online lenders. There are a number of reputable ones for sure that are trustworthy, sometimes at rates better than federal student loans, but definitely want to read the fine print. But those are the order that I think about. Are there other sources of ways to pay to college, Audrey, Katie, Nancy, that you've come across or can recommend to our viewers today?
Well, I think, Zach, you've highlighted it just right. And the way that I kind of think about that is there are sort of three larger buckets. You know, there is certainly the savings that, and I should say at the outset that I work for a private college, so we are expensive, and so we think about this a lot, but we're thinking about savings, we're thinking about contributions from parents through income, and then essentially future earnings, which is the loans that you've been talking about. And the federal loans are on very good terms, and they are the loans that we would recommend that students begin with. We're also, I think the other thing as we think about paying for college is a work-study job or a job while you're on campus. The research supports that students that work 10 to 15 hours a week actually have better outcomes than students that are not working. So that's a modest contribution, but it might be personal expenses, and it contributes to engagement at the college, particularly if it's an on-campus job. And then the one other thing that I always advise students is you know, you should be living frugally in college so that you can live better after college. You know, if you live like a college student while you're in college, then you can live like a professional when you're out of college, rather than the other way around.
No
Zach, I have to make a plug here too, though. You know, be sure and consider prepaying. Obviously, I work for the private college 529 plan, which is for private colleges and universities, but there are about a dozen states out there that offer prepaid tuition plans as well. And, you know, I use the analogy, if you can buy a 2028 model car at 2018 prices, you probably ought to take a look at it. So if that's available to you, or again, if you believe that it's likely that one of your beneficiaries is going to attend a private school, give Private College 529 a look too. It's not for everybody. We don't pretend that it is, but I do think prepayment is an important option for families to consider.
For folks who don't know, obviously the term prepayment, they understand that, but help us understand, what does it mean to have a prepaid tuition plan? Nancy.
The state plans will vary, actually they vary widely, but generally prepaid tuition plans allow you to buy tomorrow's tuition that you can use for Our plan up to 30 years. It varies depending on the plan, but you're buying those units or that tuition at today's prices. So that's, locking in today's rates. So we're talking about tuition increases. Well, by prepaying, you don't have to worry about how much tuition increases, and you don't have to worry about market volatility, because if you have purchased a year of tuition, the equivalent of a year of tuition at Smith College, when your student is ready to attend and is fortunate to be admitted and enroll, well, Smith is going to honor that year of tuition regardless of how much tuition has increased or what has happened in financial markets. Again, it's not for everyone, but it's certainly a good option for families to consider, because you can save potentially thousands of dollars on the cost of tuition.
And would a student, parent, grandparent, whoever's paying for college, would they go directly to the educational institution, or is there another source to sign up for such a plan?
There are about a dozen, actually I think it's down to 11 now, states that offer prepaid tuition plans, and I'll defer to Katie. She has a different number. I know Washington State just reopened a prepaid tuition plan that they had closed a few years ago. So I think there are 11 or 12 state-sponsored plans, and then our private college 529 plan. I believe there are still some institutions out there that will allow you to once your student enrolls, they will allow you to prepay a full 4 years or 5 years. But I think most people, when they think about prepaying, are thinking about going to one of the state-sponsored plans or private college 529.
Right, and I'll just add to that. I think one of the biggest differences, the state plans, you're actually saving for a particular school, whereas private college 529 is, about 300 schools, correct, Nancy? Those
That's
are
right.
private colleges. So, and that's important to understand too, because when you've got the 529 college savings plan, those could be used at almost any school, as we mentioned before. So those are the different limitations it's important to understand. So you want to think about what type of college you want to save for, because that might make a difference as far as which instrument you use.
And I should add, most prepaid plans only cover tuition, so you're going to need that 529 savings plan too.
That's right. And to your point, someone may start saving for one type of college that costs a certain amount of dollars, and may make a pivot as life gets in the way or doesn't get in the way, and you choose to go down a different path. If for some reason you've been fortunate over the years in your 529 plan and you have more money at the end than you needed to pay for college, how should folks think about applying that towards graduate school? Is that an option if there's excess funds inside the 529 plan? Katie, if you want to take that one.
Sure, absolutely. You can save it pretty much forever. You can save it for your grandkids if you want. You can save it for graduate school. Like we said, you can change the beneficiaries so that they're really flexible. That's one of the great things. I know we talked about the Coverdell Education Savings Account earlier and how that may or may not be eliminated with the new tax bills being proposed. One of the things about the Coverdell is that money has to be spent by the time the beneficiary turns 30. So that rule does not apply to 529 plans, which is great.
Yeah. Important distinction. We've also seen a trend in higher education where a number of state governments, city governments are getting in the fray of student loans and trying to make student loans disappear. We've seen in New York the Excelsior Scholarship. We've seen in Tennessee. We've seen in California and San Francisco. We've had various legislation proposed basically to make state colleges and universities, some local and community colleges free, or at least mostly free. Do you think, Audrey, that that's a growing trend that we'll see across the country here? And I should also add, we've seen educational institutions do the same through their endowment and through scholarships, Brown University being one recently, Harvard, other schools across the country that are really helping students in need, or at least below a certain threshold income, to make tuition completely free, which is to the relief of many folks who are paying for school otherwise.
Yeah. So, Zach, that's a whole host of topics there, and so I'll try to briefly run through them. And so I, for one, am all for all kinds of public support of higher education because of the benefits that accrue. I mean, I think one of the things that concerns me is that we've been thinking too much about higher education and education in general as an individual good rather than a public good. So I am for the public investment in higher education and recognize that almost 80% of the students out there are in public higher education. I've spent most of my career in private higher education and at institutions that are fortunate enough to be very well resourced to be able to provide some really exciting educational opportunities. And so I'll say Smith, like some of the other institutions that you've mentioned, we are spending this year $75 million in financial aid for over 60% of our students. We have a student body of about 2,500 students, and we meet the full demonstrated need of all of the students who demonstrate financial need. And with total cost of attendance in the high 60,000, that's, as I say, well, it's 2/3 of our students. And so we are able to make this an affordable option and limit it. We do ask that students take out the federal subsidized student loans, but that's the only loans that we're asking students to take out. We are seeing these plans, and for some families it's an appropriate choice to spend 2 years at a community college and then transfer to a 4-year college, and then other families really want that full 4-year residential experience. Our students, we actually require that our students graduate within 4 years, so we ensure that they have the courses available to meet their majors and are able to do that. And for those students, we also have about almost half of our students who take a semester or a year studying abroad. They gain a global perspective. So yes, colleges that are fortunate enough to have had previous graduates invest in their students. I mean, so parents are investing in their students, but in our case, we have graduates through donations to the college that are investing in future generations of students. And that's a real hallmark of private colleges because of the experience that students have.
Zack, on to that, and I agree with everything that Audrey just said, but I'll tell you something that worries me a little bit about this. We know today that enough families aren't saving enough. And so then you start, having all these, national conversations about it should be free, and it worries me that families will kind of say, hey, I don't need to save. Look, it's, by the time my kids are going to college, it's not going to cost anything. And I think we just need to reinforce that message that families with the ability to plan and save need to do so. Clearly, I think increasing support for higher ed is wonderful. I'm like Audrey, I'm excited and very supportive, but I really worry that families who should be saving are going to try and take a pass, and then we're going to end up with more debt down the line.
I'm sorry, can I just jump in there a second? The other thing that you're risking if you're not saving for your child's education and you're a family of means is that you are going to lose options. You're going to lose choice for your child. And certainly for families that have the ability to pay, the institutions are going to expect that they do so. And if you haven't adjusted your cost of living, I mean, much like the students, to prepare for this, then it's going to be too great of a change when your child gets to college age. And then finally, I will say that particularly in the private college market, many schools take ability to pay into consideration. And so if you have the ability to pay, you may be giving your child a leg up in a competitive admission market. That is not true for all schools, but that is true for many schools.
Did you want to make a point?
Sure. I was just going to add, when we're talking about all these different benefits, whether it's financial aid or like the free programs, it's just important to remember that they're not free. There's a lot of additional expenses that are typically not covered by these programs. I mean, room and board can run you north of $10,000 per year. You've got books, you've got other living expenses. So to just, when they market it as free, it's almost a little alarming because it's not free. I mean, you're still going to need to save a significant amount, which for most families will have to prepare for. So,
great point.
Let's go to our second poll question. It's a true-false, so it's very simple. Choose one of these two answers. Let's launch it right now. The question is, a 529 plan will not affect financial aid. True or false? Let's launch that poll question right now. We will look for your responses. A lot of folks voting for false, 88% so far. 8119. Looks like most of you have said the answer is false. That is the right answer, and let's delve into why. Audrey, do you want to discuss a little bit about 529 and its relationship with financial aid?
Yes, so it is correct that it's gonna affect financial aid, but I think it's going to affect financial aid less than people expect. And here I'm speaking about the financial aid formula that the vast majority of private colleges use. So there are two financial aid applications that families will commonly fill out. The most common, and it's the one for federal financial aid, including the Pell Grant and federally guaranteed loans, is the FAFSA, the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. But many, over 400 private colleges also use the College Scholarship Services profile form, which is a more robust analysis of family finances. Typically, when you're doing that, you're looking at income and assets. The expectation for colleges of a contribution from assets is between 3 and 5%. Whereas the contribution from income is between 15 and 20%. For very high income families, it can be as high as 22%. So anticipating this question, I did a little research for Smith this year, and at least that we know, because the assets came in directly from the 529 plan or prepaid tuition plan to Smith, there were 166 students who provided payment through the through 529 plans. Of those, 68 had demonstrated need and were receiving financial aid from Smith. So even though these were families that were saving, they were also receiving need-based financial aid from Smith.
Okay. Question from Janika in Georgia, who asked, what is the right way to choose a 529 plan? We talked about some of the evaluation metrics to look at the beginning, but how does one actually choose that ideal 529 plan? Nancy, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Well, I think we talked about this a little bit earlier. I think typically you want to start with your home state's plan. It's a place to start. See if there's a state tax deduction. See how, the value of that state tax deduction, and then look at a host of other factors. What are the fees associated with it? Who is the manager? What is the track record of the manager? What are the investment choices right for you? Do you like the age-based plan? I think you'll want to go through all of those questions, but I would start with your home state plan and whether or not you get a state tax deduction. You want to think about whether or not you're going to stay in that state for we'd be living in that state when your child goes to college, because if you move to another state and move your assets, you may have a clawback from that original state for any state tax deduction. So, and I have to say again, savingforcollege.com really is a good site to help you sort through those things, evaluate the different plans, and look at all those different aspects.
Okay. Question from Grace from Georgia, who asked, do 529 plans impact academic scholarships? Audrey, do you want to answer that one?
Right, and the answer for that one is going to be, to some extent, it depends, but certainly at Smith it would not. Merit-based scholarships tend to be need-blind, and even at some institutions that are seeking more families with a considerable ability to pay, they may give a leg up on a family that's going to be able to contribute a portion. So generally speaking, again, there's the difference between need-based scholarships and merit-based scholarships. So the need-based scholarships are not going to be impacted, or might be negatively impacted, but the merit-based scholarships are not going to necessarily look at that at all. Some colleges give merit-based scholarships to students that have not applied for need-based aid. And some are, taking that into consideration, but don't worry about it. Save for college. I think people are looking for not to, and they shouldn't.
I'll add to that as well. So a lot of people might be nervous that they, they save for college in this 529 and then they get a scholarship, and now what do I do with the 529 plan money? They worry that they're going to lose it all. But what happens is that normally when you would take a non-qualified withdrawal, you would pay a 10% penalty and income tax on the earnings portion of your withdrawal. But if the student does receive a scholarship, you can withdraw up to the amount of the scholarship and the penalty will be waived. So that's another incentive.
So push your student to do well and save for college.
Right.
So 529s are an excellent vehicle to help save for college, and it sounds like everyone is in unison that it makes sense for individuals to have. What are some of the other ways and strategies outside of a 529 plan or in addition to a 529 plan that folks should be thinking about as they save for higher education? Why don't we start with Katie on that one?
Sure. We mentioned the CoverDell. So the CoverDell is a way that you can save for college or K through 12 expenses. Whether or not that's going to be available going forward, we're not sure. But another popular way, people ask us about is Roth IRA, because with a Roth IRA, it operates very similar to a 529 plan where you put after-tax dollars in and the investments grow tax-free. With the Roth IRA, it's traditionally a retirement product, so you have to hold the assets until the beneficiary, until you're 59 and a half, so then you can withdraw the earnings portion tax-free. However, you can also withdraw early if you're using it to pay for qualified higher education expenses. So a lot of times people ask saving for college, well, why don't I just use the Roth IRA? Why even bother with the 529? And I think the biggest difference has to do with financial aid, because when you're withdrawing from your Roth IRA to pay for college, it's going to count as untaxed income on the FAFSA. And I think Audrey already mentioned income will ding you more than assets will, especially with a 529 plan. The other difference is retirement accounts are not counted as assets on the FAFSA at all, so your Roth IRA amount as a parent wouldn't even show up on the FAFSA. The 529 plan, it shows up as a very small amount. 5.64% of the assets in the 529 plan will count on the FAFSA as an asset. The big differences, though, is that income portion. When you withdraw from a 529 to pay for college, nothing's going to show up on your FAFSA. When you withdraw from the Roth IRA, it's going to count as untaxed income and reduce the amount of aid that the child is eligible for.
Can I add to that, Zach? I think, too, when you look at how few people have fully funded retirement, why would you use a retirement product to pay for college when 529 plans are specifically designed to help families pay for college? The other drawback to using a Roth IRA is once you draw those assets out to use them for college, you can't put them back in to pay for retirement. So, when people talk about using Roth IRAs, people talk about using life insurance. That, my response is, well, life insurance is really an insurance product and Roth IRAs are a retirement product. Why not use the product that was designed to help families plan and save for college? I'm not saying that there aren't situations where there is a better option, but it just seems to me that it makes sense for most families to use those products for the purpose they were intended. If that makes sense?
Absolutely. One question that's come in, and I'll throw it to you, Audrey. We talked on student loans a little bit earlier, and one question has come in regarding whether a 529 plan can be used to pay student loans rather than just paying directly to the educational institution. Is that a possibility, and what are your perspectives?
I think I'm not sure about the legal, or the requirement implications, so I'll defer to Katie on that. But again, the idea of you're saving for college, and at that point, you should be paying out for college either through the 529 or the prepaid college. At that time, you're incurring the expenses, and then you're not going to incur the additional interest that the loans are going to accrue. So my recommendation is you use, as Nancy just said, you're using the 529 for the purpose that it was intended, which is to pay for college. I'm not sure what the restrictions are on the loan component. I would defer that to Katie.
Sure. Yeah. If you use money from your 529 plans to pay student loans, that's considered a non-qualified expense.
Okay. So
yes,
there's
right. So it has to be current college expenses. So you get hit with that 10% penalty as well as income tax on the earnings portion of the withdrawal. So if you can't do it, it's not the best use of it.
Nancy, I want to ask you a question that's come in regarding investments in a 529 plan. Certainly there's the contribution aspect, and as you have your 529 plans for 10, 15, 20 years, you also have an opportunity to invest in certain funds that the state may offer or the 529 plan may offer. How should individuals go about selecting investments as they think about growing their 529 plan? Certainly it varies by individual and their risk tolerance, but is there some way that they can be thoughtful about how to grow their 529 plan?
Well, I think Katie alluded to this earlier. I think every 529 savings plan offers the option of an age-based option, which, you know, makes those investment decisions over time for you. So as your beneficiary nears enrollment age, your investments are going to go from, you know, more aggressive to more conservative. You're going to get out of equities and more into fixed income as you near college age. And I think that's probably a good place to start. And, you know, if for some reason you don't like that glide path, you don't, you know, that doesn't seem to fit for you, well, I think 529 savings plans today offer a host of options for families to look at and decide which best meets their needs and goals. The only other thing that I would mention is, I mentioned this earlier, that most prepaid plans only cover tuition and mandatory fees. So if you're using a prepaid tuition plan, that's really behaving like a fixed asset in your college savings portfolio, if you will. So, you know, you're going to need to pay other expenses, room and board, books, computers. So you're going to want that prepaid plan to cover your tuition, which is guaranteed, it's a fixed asset. And then you're going to want your 529 savings plan to cover those other expenses. You might want to be a little more aggressive in your investment choice there, because again, you've got this tuition prepayment over here that's guaranteed, so maybe you have a little more equity exposure in your 529 savings plan to cover those other expenses. Again, that's going to vary family to family, but it's certainly a good starting place to think about it.
Right, and as far as changing investments, 529, with the savings plan, you're allowed 2 investment changes per year.
Good point to make. Katie, let me ask you, Trish in California is curious whether 529 savings can be used without penalties paid for college application fees. Certainly it's an issue as applicants apply to multiple colleges. The costs can add up to those fees. How should Trish in California be thinking about that?
Right. Sorry, Trish. Unfortunately, the application fees are not considered a qualified expense, so that's going to be something you have to save for another way. Maybe a summer job.
Trish, if you have a daughter, we don't charge an application fee at Smith, and there are a number of other colleges in that boat as well.
That's important to say, and good for Smith for doing that. It can be very expensive to apply for college and graduate school, so kudos to Smith and other institutions who do that. We have a question from Texas regarding a child going to college with special needs, and is there within a 529 plan any benefits that would apply specifically to special needs students or different types of opportunities for them to save? Perhaps Katie or Nancy, you could opine on that.
Katie, I'll defer to you as the expert. My understanding is that for a student with special needs, any special equipment or needed for that student is considered a qualified higher education expense in the code. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. And also recently, new types of 529 plans have been introduced called ABLE plans. And this is under the Achieving a Better Life Experience Act. So if you have a child with a disability who qualifies, you're eligible for this type of 529 plan, which operates fairly similar to the 529 college savings plan, but this plan is specifically designed to help people with disabilities save not only for college but other living expenses as well. And what's really unique about these plans is that this will not forfeit your eligibility for government benefits like Medicaid. So prior to the ABLE Act, if you had a disability and you earned more than $700 a month or had assets in excess of $2,000, you would sometimes have to forfeit your eligibility for government benefits. But with the ABLE plan, you're allowed to save more as a supplement to these benefits. So I would definitely suggest checking out the ABLE plans. Not every state offers one, but they've recently eliminated the state residency requirements. So you have the option of looking at multiple different plans to choose from. And we do have a page on savingforcollege.com that explains ABLE plans as well.
Nancy, we have a question from Eileen in Washington who asks, how do you find out about the expense ratio? And perhaps you can tell our viewers what is an expense ratio and specifically how they can find the expense ratio for their respective 529 plan.
Well, I mean, there are other sources, I realize, but I think when it comes to evaluating fees, evaluating plans, I won't just plug savingforcollege.com. There's also the College Savings Plan Network that also evaluates plans. And I think those kinds of organizations do all that homework for you. I mean, all those fees are really spelled out, and you can compare side by side which plans are charging which fees, and depending on which investment option you choose.
Okay, excellent. We have about 10 minutes left, so please keep sending your questions. They've been excellent so far. We're looking forward to answering a lot more in these remaining 10 minutes. We'll also have another poll question, but at this point, let's go back to the questions, and please keep sending these questions. They're great. Agnes in California asked about using a 529 plan to go to graduate school in Germany or Sweden, and we can even broaden that question whether 529 plans can be used for institutions abroad. Katie, do you want to answer that one?
Sure, and again, it's going to depend on the school. But as I mentioned, that tool that we have on Saving for College, is your school 529 eligible? You just want to plug in the name of that school and see if it comes up, because it's going to vary, but there are a number of foreign schools that are eligible, so definitely check it out.
And that if I could jump in, not necessarily for graduate school, but there are many schools at the undergraduate level that have something that they call homeschool fees. So for students who are studying abroad, they're actually paying the tuition to the home school, and then the home school is paying the tuition to the international entity. And in that case, the 529 applies fully for that international experience, regardless of the school that the student may be attending, because the payment is going to the US-based institution.
Okay. Audrey, let me ask you this, coming in from Charles in Colorado, and I know we touched on earlier about how to save for college in terms of scholarships and grants, federal financial aid, and private student loans. Can you talk about the aspect of savings, and I'll broaden Charles's question because he's really just asking the order of savings that impact federal financial aid. But if individuals have various savings accounts, whether it's retirement accounts like a Roth IRA or an traditional IRA, as well as a 529 plan, overall, how do those impact federal financial aid, particularly from the school's perspective? I know we touched on this a little bit earlier, but it'd be helpful maybe if you could elaborate on that question.
Sure, and then I think Katie can probably jump in. Again, I want to be very clear that particularly at private schools, the financial aid that we're providing is largely institutional aid. So for Smith, over 95% of that $75 million is institutional aid, and only a small amount is federal and state aid. So with respect to the federal aid, it's going to be the FAFSA that's going to determine eligibility, and they're not going to be looking at home equity or retirement. And in the cases of separated or divorced families, they're only looking at the custodial parent. So that's a very different evaluation of a family's financial picture. So you'll be thinking about the savings there. The eligibility for federal financial aid is going to be looking at income and limited assets, not including retirement or home equity. On the other hand, if you don't know where your student is headed and you're planning for the potential of a private school and you'll be filling out the profile form, that's a much more robust analysis, and it's going to include looking at factors such as home equity, looking at factors of the income of the non-custodial parent as far as that's concerned. So it's a very, very different kind of an analysis that the formulas are looking at. And one of the real challenges in terms of saving for college is you have this infant, which is a bundle of potential, and you're not sure where she or he is headed. So again, I come back to the preserving the options for that student and the flexibility of 529 plans to change the beneficiary. And from there, I'm going to turn it over to Katie.
Yeah. Katie, any other comments you'd like to add?
Just repeating what Audrey said, if you're thinking about the FAFSA for the federal aid, the retirement assets won't be looked at all. A 529 will be looked at is a very small percentage, as we mentioned. So, you know, it's important to note also 529 plans versus an account like a custodial account, that will count as student income, which can be assessed at up to 20% on the FAFSA, versus the 529 plan, which we said will only count about 5.64%. So that's a big difference too. 529 assets will always be counted as a parent asset and not a student asset. It makes a big difference.
Right.
Nancy, we have a number of questions coming in from various states, and folks asking, when a 529 plan is opened and there's a choice between having parents or the grandparents being the named owner, so to speak, of that 529 plan, are there any benefits, tax implications, et cetera, that would make one choose a parent or a grandparent in terms of that 529 plan?
You know, Zach, a lot of the thinking behind that is related to financial aid. So if it's okay with you, I'm going to kick this over to Audrey.
Yeah, well, and certainly the needs analysis in both the FAFSA and the profile, so the one used by the federal government and the private, is looking at the student. And as Katie said, any assets held in the student name are expected to contribute at a higher level. There's a lot of protection for assets held in the parent name, but there is no review of assets that are held in the grandparent's name. So from a financial aid perspective, the advantage is to have it in the grandparent's name. I can't comment on the tax implications in either case, but certainly from a financial aid perspective, the advantage is.
I'm going to have to jump in right here because the difference is when the grandparent withdraws to pay for the student's college, now you're going to be that with the amount of that withdrawal is going to count as student income.
That's the tax.
So there you go. And you know, that's something to consider. You can always time your withdrawals so that, you know, the grandparent helps out the student after they've already filed their last FAFSA, and then there would be no implication. So that's a strategy. Or the grandparent, you know, can just contribute to a parent-owned account is another way to get around it. One other benefit for a grandparent having their own account is if they are able to collect or claim a state tax benefit. I know that's important to a lot of grandparents.
And just to clarify on that timing, Katie, so now that FAFSA is prior, the grandparent could actually be using their assets to pay the junior year as well as the senior year and not necessarily impact. That wouldn't, the CSS schools, it may have a different impact, but at least for those FAFSA schools, you're going to be okay paying junior and senior year.
That's right.
Yeah, I was going to say, Nancy, the CSS profile is also prior year, so that would be the same as the FAFSA, and that's a new change just in the last year. That rather than looking at the immediate year preceding, you're looking at 2 years prior.
We have about 2 minutes remaining. I do want to get to our final poll question, and then we'll have some concluding thoughts. So let's launch that final poll question. It's also a yes/no answer. Very simple. Do you or would you ask family and friends to contribute to your child's college savings? Yes or no? Would love to hear from you as we approach our final 2 minutes here. So many questions have come in. We weren't able to get to all of them, but they've really just been phenomenal. I do, in our concluding minutes, as we look at the poll questions that are open, and I can just give you the update so far. About half of you have voted. Answers are pretty split, but more of you have said yes, about 53%, 47% have said no. We've seen about 60% of the votes come in. In our final minute here, why don't we just go around with any concluding thoughts? I'll open it up. Audrey, why don't we start with you, and then maybe Nancy and Katie, and then we can conclude and keep the answers brief because we have about 1 minute left.
Okay, well, I want to thank the audience for great questions and for the fact that they're thinking ahead to save for college and preserving choices for their loved ones. So thank you very much.
Great. Nancy?
I'll add to that. Thank you to savingforcollege.com for being so proactive in this area. And I think you've heard it, but it bears repeating. You know, the more you prepay or save, the less you're going to borrow later. The more choices you're going to have for your future student to be sure they get to apply to and attend the institution that best meets their needs.
Katie?
You know, just thank everyone for tuning in. Thank you all, the panelists, and Zach for being here and helping us out with our event at Saving for College. I don't think anyone ever regrets putting money away for, you know, things like college, so you're making a smart choice. If your question didn't get answered, please visit our forum. We've got a lot of great people with a lot of expertise and advice that answer questions on our forum. That's forum.savingforcollege.com.
And I want to thank everyone for being here today. We've had phenomenal questions. Thank you to everyone across the country who came with very challenging questions for our expert panel. I want to thank Private College 529 as our sponsor. I want to thank savingforcollege.com for hosting this event, and to our phenomenal panelists, Audrey Smith, Nancy Farmer, Katie Flynn. Thank you so much, and it's been a pleasure and honor to host this event, and we will see all of you very soon. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Zach. Thanks, Katie. Thanks, Audrey.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.